Okay, our career competitor today is a keynote speaker who specializes in merging customer success with digital strategy thanks to over 35 years' experience in fostering customer-centric cultures. As the author of Customer Transformation, our guest is recognized among the top 30 customer experience gurus in 2024, thanks to being able to pull on their work leading digital strategy at Google and innovating storytelling technologies at Fox and Disney. Our guest also offers a fractional chief customer officer practice to help organizations align closely with customer needs. They're also well established in the gaming and AI sectors, and they are educating students at SNHU on the fusion of business strategy and technology. I'm so excited to be gaining some competitive advantages from our guest and their story today, Mr. Chris Hood. Chris, how are you doing?
I am doing fabulous.
Wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome, and I've been really looking forward to this, mainly because at the heart of what you do are what we're about on this show, and it's people. You know, we're about people, and we're a complicated bunch, aren't we? We have our ways, we have our beliefs, we have our perspectives, and I'm sure this is a world that you are just so busy in, and the demand must be so great for what you do. Because at the heart of it, we're always trying to figure out how do people think, how do people respond, etc., what it is that's being presented to them. So before we get too much into the details of what you're doing at depth today, I would love to go back to maybe the origin of all of this and how it all started, because having done my research on you, there's some good story there. There's some really interesting, unique ways that you got going on this whole journey that you're on now. And I'd love for you to maybe take us back to those days where it's like, hey, where on earth did this whole story and journey of yours begin?
Yeah, a long, long time ago in this galaxy. My career started in a combination of retail and the movie theater. One of my first jobs was working at a movie theater, taking tickets, popping popcorn, cleaning auditoriums, and watching movies. And as I progressed through my career, I stayed mostly in this media and entertainment space. But what became really interesting, I got into college. I was asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I had this choice between going into movies, which is where I had a passion, or going into computers, which is really, at that time, I considered a hobby. And I decided to do what every reasonable person wants to do when they grow up. It's like, I'll be a movie producer. And so I went into film, and then I went around. I did a little bit in music. I did a little bit in radio. I did some TV. I did video games. And then when we got into around the 2000s, a little bit before that, we started to see the internet blossom. .coms became a thing. And I got an MBA, and I saw that businesses were really challenged with understanding how to connect with people online. What was that digital experience all about? And how they were going to attract consumers to come to a website and perform some sort of action? And it became very clear that there was this convergence happening, because really, if you look at a website, it's nothing more than another form of entertainment. We are trying to tell a story about our brand. We are trying to personalize the experience. We are getting people to engage with us in different ways. And so I brought a lot of the experience of storytelling and movies and video games, engagement, and how do we make things more enjoyable.
Sure.
And started to really just merge those two together. And then as I progressed through my career, I really just made an entire career of really translating between the business and the technology sides, and the technology to the business sides, and how do we create this new form of entertainment, and how do we connect closer with our consumers, and how do we create these really interesting and compelling stories for brands to be successful. And then that brought me to Google. Spent a lot of time at Google working with Fortune 100 companies all over the world around how do they build better digital experiences. I left Google. I wrote a book, customer transformation, all around how do you adapt to the ever-evolving technology and needs that consumers have. And again, it's come full circle because you go all the way back to my days at the movie theater, and I opened my book with the exact same thing. I was told that the customer was always right. And now you look at it, and as you opened with, we as individuals are more empowered than ever before. Consumers have unlimited demands and access to information online. Social media has allowed us to complain better than we've ever been able to complain before. And so businesses really have to recognize this and be able to adapt to this. And so I was able to bring that, again, my story full circle in the book.
Yeah, as a coach myself, I can't help but immediately just gravitate towards this notion of how you must go into a room, and again, forgive me if I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but going into this room, going into these meetings for the first time, and these rooms, so to speak, being filled with people that they assume what people are going to want. And I have to imagine that one of the first things that you have to work on is kind of breaking through those assumptions, because if we're assuming what somebody thinks, then we're really not giving them space to tell us what they want. And I'm curious, just when you hear me explain it that way, like how much of that initial work is based around, as I always call it in my world, I'm helping you get out of your own way. So from an assumption standpoint, I'm just curious, how big a role does that assumption piece play when you initially start engaging with these businesses around this work?
Yeah, it's all about changing people's mindsets. And that is very hard, especially today. Think about our geo and political and cultural differences that we already have in the world. And it's very hard to change somebody's mindset. The good news for me is that when you're talking about business, you can remove a lot of that, and you can root it in, hopefully you can root it in logical, clear facts. For example, you want to say that the goal of your business is to generate money, and I say the goal of your business is to make your customer happy. Doesn't sound like it's too much of a difference, but there are companies that are focused on their bottom line profits. And my argument is yeah, but you can't generate those profits without customers. And if you don't have customers, you don't have a business. And if you upset those customers, you lose your bottom line. So why wouldn't you want to focus more on your customers? So it sounds very logical, but you're absolutely right. You will get into situations where they believe they know better than you do, and yet you can clearly see that they're doing it wrong. So I usually have a set of questions to start with, and I will ask, how many people in the room feel as if you are doing a superb job with meeting the needs of your customers? And they'll all raise their hand. Yes, we believe we are doing that. And then when you actually go through the process and you conduct these workshops and you get them to think about it differently, and you show them examples of how to think about that differently, it never fails. By the end of the workshop, I can ask the exact same question, and they'll say, no, we're not doing any of this. And it just gives you that understanding of how you have to go through the process to get them to think differently. I have been in rooms where I have started having the conversation, and executive leadership start to tune out. They are not interested. They have not kind of mandated to open your eyes and give this a chance. I've had executives point blank say, that's not what we're going to do. And I said, then I don't need to be here. Thank you very much.
Right.
I've canceled phone calls after prep because I'm like, you're either going to do this or you're not. And if you don't want to do it, then don't waste my time. I'm just going to be wasting your time. Yep. You either are going to decide you want to change or you're not. And that is very hard for a lot of organizations who are set in that routine of, well, we've always done it this way. Well, that's the death of all businesses. When you get into that mindset of, we've always done it this way, so we must be doing something right. Yeah. And I can show clear examples for a lot of businesses that are not doing it right. You think Disney, we'll call out Disney. Most people would argue that Disney has an unbelievable grasp on customer experience and customer satisfaction. It's in their nature. But I could probably pull up 4 or 5 articles that demonstrate that they really don't. And so you have to be able to get them into that mindset first and foremost, that we're going to just look at it differently. And if you're able to come on the journey with me, then I guarantee by the end, I'll at least give you a little nugget for you to start thinking about. And then hopefully that nugget turns into actionable results down the line.
I'm so glad that you've been able to get us to here, Chris, already inside around 10 minutes, like inside of 10 minutes, because that's where I felt this conversation had the ability to go today. Because on the outside looking in, maybe someone's seeing you as a guest coming on this show and thinking, well, I don't really have to think too much in my work around customer experience. But at the heart of your work is human behavior, human mindset, growth mindset, for that matter, and we can all win when we're talking about that, and we're learning from someone who is specializing in that particular area. And I think anybody listening to this too is immediately going to resonate with this. Either this is how I've always done it, this is how we've always done it, and the results have been solid. The results have been decent. And how anybody listens to this is just thinking, okay, maybe I have been settling for a standard, unbeknownst to me, that is far below what I'm capable of getting to. When you think about some of those conversations that you're having with these folks, how are you helping them see, maybe it is things like articles, maybe it is like online information, whatever it is, but what are maybe some of the specific approaches that you're taking to maybe help them see that where they've been settling for performance and where they're truly capable of performance, and what that gap maybe looks like for them?
Yeah, it still goes back to you're going to have a desire to do that.
Sure.
I was on a call with a very large company. I won't name the company. Sure. And on that call was the chief information officer. And it was his direct reports. So there was actually about 100 people on this call, all under this CIO. And I started to outline areas of opportunity. And the CIO came out and said, well, hold on, I just want to be clear. We're not here to grow our business. We're here to maintain our business. And I said, well, then again, why am I here? And you just said to 100 people on your team that you have no interest in actually growing your business. That status quo is perfect for you. And so there's a great example of, you're never going to get past that. If your executive leadership does not care about the success and growth of your organization, and status quo is acceptable, then there's nothing you can do about that. So you still have to get everybody on the same page in terms of what you want to accomplish. And then from there, you can start to break down these elements into pieces. Part of my book is it's a 7-stage framework. And so there's 7 different areas. And sure, there are going to be companies that say, look, out of those 7 stages, step 1 and step 2, we've got a firm grasp on. We are struggling in step 3, maybe step 6. So let's spend time on those areas. Now, I can guarantee that in most cases, no one out there is doing all 7 steps at the level that I have outlined. And so going in and sitting down and figuring out what are the areas that might have the most impact, the quickest impact. Oftentimes in business, when you're developing new products, we talk about a minimal viable product, right? MVP. I sort of look at it as, what is your minimal viable business outcome? Because what do you want to accomplish, and what can we change immediately to help you accomplish that, to reach your business objectives faster? And that might only be 1 or 2 small little adjustments. but we can sit down, we can go through, we can conduct workshops, we can outline it, and then we can figure out what's working, what's not working, and then we can evolve, iterate, and continue that process. But it takes, again, as we've talked about, it takes leadership to say, yes, we are going to do it. It takes people willing to listen and to open their eyes to potential ways of changing. And then it takes the execution of a workshop or some sort of process by which we can give you the tools and the resources and the mindset shift to actually then be able to enable it.
Yeah, and firstly, you don't have to be concerned when it comes to this audience of whether people are ready to hear this stuff or ready to work on this stuff. This is a warm room, Chris. This is a warm room when it comes to this kind of thing, first and foremost. But secondly, what I think something I'm really hearing in what you're saying here is just the simple ability to, on the front end, as we listen, to understand that through that listening, there's going to come these tools that are essential in optimizing what we're doing, because you're coming in with optimal standards in these 7 areas, as you mentioned. And for someone to actually say, well, listen, maybe we don't need help in these 7 areas, to your point, then why am I here? But then if you're open to this conversation on the front end, then suddenly now it's like, okay, here I am with these 7 tools. Chris is presenting them into the 7 areas, and Chris is presenting them in a way where if I were to approach all 7 of these areas, there is an optimal level that we can aspire towards. And I'm curious, just within these 7 areas, and again, forgive me for I've not read the book, but what I would love to know is there always going to be a place where someone can say across these 7 areas, listen, this is where we need to start. This is the absolute essential place for us to start.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would probably adjust this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even necessarily have to be an optimal approach. It's simply a different approach.
Mm.
So earlier you suggested, you mentioned customer experience, and that people within an organization may or may not be involved with customer experience. This is a great example, because if I was to ask you, who are the typical teams that are responsible for customer experience, you would probably present me with a slew of different typical people. And the number one question that I get asked really often is, well, my job is not customer facing. I'm sitting in, say, I'm sitting in the technology team. I don't actually engage with the customers. So as a result, I'm not responsible for customer experience. Or, I'm sitting in legal and I'm not responsible for customer experience. And you could go through and look at every single team role within a company. And I've done this before. It's on my blog, and you can separate it and say, these are our customer facing roles and these are our non-customer facing roles. And a simple argument is to say everyone in the entire organization, despite the team, is responsible for customer experience. Mm-hmm. So then you would say, well, how and why? And what do you mean by that? Well, customer experience is rooted in a lot of different areas, and one of those areas is the pure culture of your organization. If you are customer-centric, if you as an organization is focused on the customer full-time across all teams, then odds are you're going to be able to deliver that customer experience better. If you've got a split, like only half of your company cares about the customer and the other half doesn't care about the customer, well, then you're technically at 50% if we wanted to overly simplify this.
Sure.
And so this gets all the way down into areas like, how do you hire? And my argument is, when's the last time you had an interview? And again, let's say it's a non-customer focused role, and you said, hey, thank you for applying for this financial analyst position. Can you tell me how critical this role is, in your opinion, to how we are successful with our customer? I guarantee you that is a question that maybe 1% of all the companies in the world are directly asking.
Right.
And it's an example of how you start to build a customer-centric organization and get into people's mind that the customer is important no matter what the role is. And if you can do that and you can get those people thinking about it from the very start, then you as an organization, the culture that you are building for that organization, and the people who you are bringing in have a customer-focused mindset. That doesn't require training. That doesn't require some workshop to go through. That is a complete and total adjustment to how you hire and onboard people. I can't say that's optimal. I can say, though, that if you do it, your organization is going to be better prepared to answer the critical questions when it comes to how do you manage customer experience? How do you manage customer support? How do you make your customers more successful in that process? And just by doing that, you as an organization will become more successful.
Yeah. Knowing that end result and getting everybody on board, coming all the way back to culture, coming all the way back to the community that you're operating in. And again, this is where we can start to personalize this for anybody listening too, is that even if you don't hear yourself right now in terms of, you know, am I operating in a space that's customer facing? Am I even in an industry that's customer facing? Who knows? You know, maybe none of that part of this resonates with you. I think even just the notion of saying how clear are you in the environment that you're operating within, and are you all in many ways pulling in the same direction? Are you actually saying, like, this is where we're actually trying to get to, folks? And again, customers, no customers, wherever you feel as though you fall on that spectrum, I have to encourage anybody listening just to what you're saying here, Chris. It's like, okay, consider where you're operating in and if everybody's on the same page, first and foremost, towards that end goal. And then secondly, what might some of that mindset that you've touched on here truly do to help you see how you can best utilize these tools, which is really where you, and I used that word optimal before, and I appreciate you correcting me on that, because that's that in my mind now as I'm listening to you, that's the optimal piece here. It's not about necessarily optimal performance. It's more about how can you optimize the use of the tool in order to arrive at that result that we're all trying to get to.
Yeah. When we talk about developing and nurturing positive cultures within the organization, a lot of times you'll go to somebody, especially this happens a lot in technology, where you say, what are you working on? And they'll say, well, I'm working on this blah, 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 blah project, but I really have no idea what it's for or what the goal of it is. I've been handed a task. This is my daily assignment. I come in, I have my blinders on, I do the work, I submit the work, and then I move on. I have no idea what the purpose of this work is in the bigger scheme of things. Now, on one side, we could argue that's a leadership issue. Leadership needs to communicate top down what our priorities are, what our KPIs are, what our purpose and goals are for the organization, and how your work directly impacts that. Yet, if you built a culture that is customer focused and that is rooted in everything you do, then hopefully you get to the point where naturally you're thinking, oh, this assignment that I have has a correlation back to the customer. Oh, this is what the purpose is. And it's not something that should have to be communicated down from leadership on a regular basis, because you just know that the one standard in your entire life at that company is to satisfy the customer. And so naturally you would hope that everything that you are working on is for that purpose. And also, if somebody is giving you a task that you feel does not align with the purpose of satisfying the customer, you should be able to push back. You should be able to say, well, I don't get this. Like, can you explain to me how this helps the customer? Even when it is in a role that is not customer facing. So this gives your team the power to be able to be successful, be motivated, understand what they are working on, and be able to, participate in that process simply by how you're going to build that culture from the start.
Yeah. It's a piece that I talk a lot about in the work I do, is that a lot of time organizations, we're trying to allocate the work and then hope that ownership comes from the work. And really what you're doing is reaffirming a lot of what I speak to is build the ownership first. Like, have people invested in an outcome. Have people invested in that thing on the other side of the bridge that we're all trying to build toward, and then say, hey, here's some work to do towards that. And then allow them to be the very filter system, like you said. Hey, is this a brick in the bridge that's actually going to put us on the other side, or has it got nothing to do with this very thing I've taken ownership for? And I think, yes, leadership 100%, but to your point, just something in many ways as simple as just like, hey, where are we going? Where are we going, and what's the destination here? And if we're all really clear on that, then so much of what you're speaking to here, in the best way to really describe it, is that word that you use so much in your work, is transformation. If we're going to see transformation, then by God, we better know where we're going. We better know what that end destination is. And there's, in many ways, there's more we can go into in this for sure, but there's this element of storytelling that I wanted to hit on with you, Chris, because you are a highly acclaimed speaker, someone who's been doing so much work on the keynote stages for many a year. And this not that I'm saying that all of what you're doing on that stage is based around storytelling, but I know so much of what your success has been built around is implementing this tool of storytelling. And I personally believe it's something we don't talk enough about. I think this show is a wonderful platform to be talking about it, because I think storytelling can help everybody. So just from your background, firstly, I'd love for you just to educate our listeners what your background has been in terms of utilizing the art of storytelling, and then maybe even just give us one or two like key insights, like, hey, if you really want to start using this as a tool within your world, what might one or two of those examples look like?
That's an entire podcast.
I know. As I'm asking the question, because I'm like, how much time are you going to give this guy right now?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I would love to share on this topic. I'll try to break this down into two pieces. The main piece is, and what you are ultimately asking, is around storytelling itself.
Yeah.
And you've heard, I've shared a couple stories as we've had the conversation, and being able to integrate those stories into conversation, I think, is a critical piece. And if you think about this, it's very hard for some people to really break down stories. Like, you might have a story in your head and you say, oh yeah, when I was 10 years old, blah, 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 blah happened. And that's your story. And the problem is that you tell that same story every single time, right? The masters, the people who are really good at storytelling, have a whole database in their head of stories. 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 different stories. And the story system works based on keywords, much like if you were to do a search in a database. So if you say something like pizza, I would go through my internal story database and pull out a story about like Domino's, right? Because I've got a couple of stories and I can share that experience. And then the next part of that is to make it relevant. So hopefully, as we are having the conversation, you are asking me a question, you are laying down the foundation of a couple of keywords, I'm picking up those keywords, I'm starting to think about what the story is, and then I'm going into my Rolodex, my database of stories in my head, and then based on that keyword, coming back and saying, oh yeah, you mentioned blah, 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 and then I'm going to pull out my story. It's relevant because it's impactful. It's interesting. People gravitate towards stories naturally. We love stories. We love escape. We love looking at different perspectives. Everything on social media is a story. Everything on the news is a story. When we go to the movies, it's a story. When we listen to music, it's a story. If you play video games, it's a story. We as human beings love stories. So that's why they are so important. And because no one likes to watch a presentation up on the screen where somebody is just reading a script and going through what's on the screen, right? So you have to kind of think about how you are going to integrate those stories. You've got to come up with a bunch of stories. You've got to memorize those stories. You've got to be able to adapt those stories to be relevant in the conversation. Which then brings me to the second point, which is not telling stories. And the part of not telling stories is actually telling about experiences that are relevant. And what I mean by that is, if you think about this, as we've been talking about customer and customer focused, we ourselves are all customers. Right? Like, I could ask you, when was the last time you went on a trip?
Earlier this year, February this year. Yep.
February of this year. Okay. So you know the basic process of going on a trip, right? You book your airlines, you book your hotel, maybe you get somebody to drive you, you make sure your pets are taken care of because you're going to be gone for a while.
Right.
You show up at the airport, you check in, you get the Uber, you go to a hotel, you make dinner reservations. You know the script because you've done it before. You, as a customer, have gone on a trip. We use about 7 to 8 different technologies or applications to book a full trip. But for us individually, it's just a trip. That's our story. That's relevant. We've all been to the grocery store. We've all been out to eat. We've all been to maybe a gas station, especially if you drive. We all have these relevant experiences. Now what you do is you take those relevant experiences and you apply them into the conversation. So if we are talking about something like an experience, I can say, well, when's the last time you've been on a trip?
Right.
And you get it because you already understand it from a consumer perspective. I don't have to tell you a story. You just immediately jump to the last time you were on a trip, what that experience was. And now I ask you, did you enjoy that trip? Why did you enjoy that? What was the problems during that trip? If I ask you something like, the last time you went grocery shopping, what if as you were checking out, they said, oh, I'm sorry, our ATM machine is down. We are only taking cash right now. You understand that because you can put yourself into that position. I can make it relevant to the conversation. It doesn't have to be a story. It's an experience. And as people and as individuals, we gravitate and we understand those experiences because we've all been on them. And I can then take that and apply it to what our conversation is to prove a point, to shift your mindset. It doesn't have to be an elaborate, when I was 10 years old, I was hunting in the woods and I tripped over a branch, and, it doesn't have to be a story, but it does have to be relevant. And I think if your listeners take anything away from this, is think about the relevant real world scenarios that you are on a daily basis. And those are just as interesting as, say, a fully completed, fleshed out story.
As you were talking, in my mind, I'm running through everything that we've spoken about through the first 20, 25 minutes as well. And again, it comes back to knowing what the ideal outcome, the ideal result is for storytelling. And you're hitting it right here. Relevance. Like, I wonder how many people right away when you sort of share that go, wow, I've told so many stories over the years that had nothing to do with the conversation, nothing to do with the person's point that they were making previously. It was just an opportunity for me to dive into this story I've been dying to share with people, Yeah.
Those stories you can share at the beginning of your meeting.
Right.
So another thing that I do is I read, I can't say it's the news, but I have my phone. And on my phone, I have an Android phone, so Google, but I can swipe left and I have all of the relevant Google stories. And like the very first story here is, Zack Snyder fans' response to David Cornsweat's Superman suit, right? New Superman movie. Okay, it's interesting, whatever. I scroll down some more, and here's one, there's a teacher busted for making out with an 11-year-old. That sounds bad, but it's interesting. And so I can go through and I read the headlines, and you know what happens is you're in a meeting, you're doing some introductions. It's great to connect with you. You hear people off on the side. Maybe they're talking about sports. Maybe they're talking about anything. And I can say, hey, did you hear this? whatever it is. I just read it this morning. I actually went into a meeting and I had read an article about the company that I was with, their competition. And I said, hey, did you read this story today about your competition? Every single person in there was like, no, what? So if you want to really come across as interesting, just go through and scan the news stories and pop culture and anything like that, like fast food. Taco Bell has all of these new menu items. I mean, here, there's stuff all the time. And you just go in and you're like, oh, did you hear how Taco Bell is doing some collaboration now with Doritos? And it's interesting. So spin those cycles that are not relevant to what you're there for as, times for networking, meeting people, getting to know them. And if you do that ahead of time, then you seem interesting. You seem like an interesting person, a knowledgeable person. Then they're more interested in hearing what you're going to have to say when you actually do the presentation. And then afterwards, then you can follow up with more crazy stories.
Yeah. And I love this because, again, we're all about how do we implement some form of a competitive advantage with every guest that comes on this show. I'm always hopeful that you're going to impart us with these insights of anybody listening. You're getting some nuggets to give you that competitive advantage in whatever walk of life that you are operating in. And so much of what you're saying here is actually allowing people to say, listen, I actually don't need to change who I am or anything like that at my core. What I need to do is just kind of mix it around a little bit, move some of these pieces that I've already got in place. That story that can maybe be put to one side, maybe you open with that. But maybe then you really turn yourself on in terms of your mindset and just your awareness to how do I stay relevant right now? Because if I don't remain relevant, the likelihood of me utilizing the time that I have, whether it's a discovery call with someone, it's an important board meeting, whatever it is, the likelihood of you optimizing that time immediately drops the moment relevance leaves the room. And so I'm just, as I'm hearing you talk through this, I'm just trying to sort of help anybody listen to this, saying, hey, listen, no matter where you are in the world and whatever walk of life you're in, this is a to-do list or how-to list or whatever you want to put to not just capture attention and pull people in, but then to maintain their attention and make sure that you're optimizing the time or the reason why it is you were connecting in the first place, right?
Yeah, I guess if we were to really break this down for a story, you have a keyword, something that when you hear that word, you know what the story to tell is. The brief understanding of that story, can you tell that story in like less than 1 minute? And then the relevancy of that story. So you always have to bring it back into that relevancy. You don't want to talk about this new Superman suit as an example of customer experience. Like, they're not relevant. And somebody's going to sit there and question you, like, what are you talking about? And then you're going to lose interest and you're going to lose credibility. So the three elements is have a keyword, be able to tell the story in 1 minute, and then build the relevancy for that story based on what you're talking about.
I love a great 1, 2, 3 to close us out. That's a wonderful 1, 2, 3 that anybody listening to this can take away with them. And if anything, I have to apologize for my inability sometimes to stay truly relevant because my pure curiosity around everything that you're sharing with me just sends way too many signals into my brain all at once, and the question becomes 5 questions in one and all this kind of thing. But I'm always working my butt off behind the scenes to stay relevant with all of this stuff, and I feel as though this conversation is going to serve people in so many various walks of life. But if anybody, Chris, is looking to maybe connect with you, learn more about you, whatever it may be, that's listening to this and just can't resist getting in touch, how might the best way to do that be?
Easiest way is connect with me on my website. So you can go to chrishood.com, CHRISHOOD.com. And on there, you can find my social media. You can connect with me. You can read my blog. You can listen to my podcast. You can book me for speaking gigs or workshops. But yeah, everything is right there, chrishood.com.
Awesome. Well, all that information will be right there in the show notes. But as we wrap up, Chris, cannot thank you enough for your time. The generosity of insight, too, just absolutely wonderful. So just best of luck with anything and everything going on in your world, brother. And just thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely. Pleasure.